Hi, I'm working my way up the Board Game Geek charts with 300 board games that I've played. Today we're looking at my 270th game, Risk. The Board Game Geek ranking is currently 21,528 with an average user score of 5.6. My rating is 5 out of 10. Risk is a basic area control game. It does what it does do very well. There's nothing particular here that you can say is flawed about it. It's just that it kind of drags on. It's too long, and once you've played it a few times, it's going to feel very samey, in my opinion. But it's solid. It has stood the test of time for a reason. You're not worried about the intricacies of unit types and whatever you do in a war game. It is just how many armies do you have, and there's dice chucking involved, and the dice chucking is quite reasonable, but it can lead to some interesting results. So you could have those battles where those one or two armies just hold on, and you come in with 14 armies against 2 and they whittle you down to like 3, but you still win at the end. Like that's exciting. It's just, playing with 4 or 5 people, it can take almost all day to play sometimes. There's rewards for having an entire continent. So there on this one, we can see Africa in one color, Australia in pink, and Asia and whatever. If you have all of if you can hold on to an entire region, continent, when it becomes your turn again, you're going to get extra armies for that. So obviously other people are going to be trying to make sure that doesn't happen. And then there's a card collection mechanic. Every time you attack, you get a card, and eventually you'll have a set of 3 different ways to trade them in for more armies. And the number of armies you get from that escalates. And that's what eventually will break the tension, right? The little extra armies you get along the way really pale in comparison to the armies you get from those cards. And, but that works actually pretty well, and it encourages you to attack. Basically, you have to attack on your turn. You have to do an attack somewhere on your turn to get one of those cards, otherwise you're not going to win the game. So mechanically, absolutely solid, classic game. Everybody should play it at least once, and I'll talk about some electronic versions that you can try out yourself. My first experience with Risk was when I was about 9 years old. A friend of mine called Philip, who also taught me to play Uno and Ono 99, which is the next one up on the list, also table tennis, and he taught me how to fry an egg as well. We were at this other family's house. I have no idea why, or why particularly we were playing Risk at their house, or even why he was there, because that was kind of unusual. He was going to teach me how to play this game. I'm not entirely sure if it was just him and me, or there was the other guy who would have been the father of that household. And the TV was on in the background, and we were watching this movie while we were playing this game. This came out in 1981. It's about a guy who is trying to get across America in the last car or something, and there's no fuel left, and it's sort of oil shock. Except we were switching back and forth between the channels, and we missed the end of the movie, and we never finished the game. As far as I can tell, it was this style of plastic, actual little soldiers. Interesting that this particular picture is of the Ukraine, and we're currently in a little bit of an oil crisis of our own over here. I remember being quite confused with the pieces, that the soldiers, the cannons, the horses are literally just 3 denominations, like 1s, 2s and 3s, or 1, 3s and 5s, whatever they are, just so you don't have to have a whole bunch of single soldiers if you get to a certain number. Sometimes you'll have 20, 30, 40 armies in a single spot. Some versions, though, are just more abstract, like this. In my late teens, after I'd left home, I was studying business at TAFE. We had a Windows computer in the house. It wasn't mine, ran Windows 3.1. And we had WinRisk. Now, this came out in December 92, so I'm guessing I was probably playing it about 93, 94. I don't think I lived there much past that. And you can play this on Internet Archive, and it will actually boot up an instance of Windows 3.1, and you can play this. This is old school, and you can make it full screen. For the purpose of this video, I won't do this. Play with up to 3 players. I like Risk with 3. I think that's it's a good number. In real life, I think Board Game Geek says 4, but I think it's best with 3. I think you're just waiting around for your turn otherwise. So this one, we're going to claim some territories. There's this meme about Australia and the fact that you should just take Australia. But the thing about Australia is it's very hard to break up out of here. I like South America. When I'm playing against the AI, I always go to either South America or Africa. You can defend these lines here and here. There's like you're on 3 fronts here and 2 fronts here, and then you've got 2 different directions you can go that are actually relatively easy to defend. In Australia, you just get bogged down here going back and back. I know people do it. People who maybe played the game a lot more than me I can assume maybe they're right. Trying to defend Europe, Asia is awful. Sometimes just grabbing Australia, so you got a source of income in a sense, because you're going to get a bonus. My next risk was in about 2004, 2005 for the Megadrive, as it was known in Australia, or the Genesis, as it was known in other parts of the world. The cartridge was unusually heavy, but I actually had my Megadrive sometime in the late 90s, but I had a PlayStation 1 first, and then a Megadrive a few weeks later. It's really, really cheap. So I was into retro games back then. I never owned one when it originally came out. This is official Risk, and you can also play this for free on archive.org. It runs in an emulator, as the other one does as well. There's an arcade mode, which is you actually aim the cannons and shoot in a first-person type view, and that impacts on the battle. I think I might have tried that once. You're not using a mouse for this like you are with WinRisk. This is, you've got to move your cursor around with the cursor keys. One is the A button. Oh, the AI really likes Australia too, apparently. So maybe that's why I always did better when I didn't go for Australia, because the AI was always trying to fight it out for Australia. It's like, let the two AI go for Australia and I will have South America and Africa. Thank you very much. And yeah, and this is what it used to look like. There's these animations and you can actually turn them off somehow. I suggest doing that because otherwise it takes about an hour to play, when really you can actually get through it in about 20 minutes. Official Risk for the Mega Drive / Genesis, circa 94, but I didn't play it till about 10 years later. Lux Delux, which is now available on pretty much every platform there is, was originally a Macintosh game. I had it on my G4 iBook in about 2008. It was written in Java and it was kind of a bit clunky even for then. I guess they still thought that Java was going to be the next big thing, because it wasn't. It is on Steam if you're on PC. It's a bargain, and if you at all want to play this game, I highly recommend it. There are over 800 maps, they say, including a classic map. My favourite are these castle ones. Each of these castles is its own region. So you can sort of lock down these castles and then you start getting bonus armies for having these castles, and then it sort of becomes a race to see who can get them. These bridges are like their own little region, and then there's other regions. There's nice choke points between everything, and, you know, the bridges are always hotly contested. The castles, everyone's trying to take a little chip out of your castle so you don't have the full set. That's cool. This one has the castle in the middle, which is like big bonus, but then everyone's going to be trying to go for that. And then each of these villages is a region unto itself. There was back in the day a separate sort of player standalone campaign version that I had based on sort of ancient battles. I don't know if they still sell that, but probably I would suspect that the maps are probably available in here. There's a whole bunch of different AIs as well. You can choose the style of each particular AI. It's really cool. I did play a game the other day, but yeah, if you want Risk, this is Risk. This is the definitive version to get. And you can play a game in about 15-20 minutes if you're playing by yourself, probably less than that. And finally, Lord of the Rings Risk, which I played about 6 months ago. It is rated 4,572 as we speak. That is a big jump up from the 21,000 of the base game. This game is much better than the original. Much, much better. I'm not into fantasy at all. I'm not into Lord of the Rings. I generally don't play fantasy games, but there really isn't any fantasy mechanics in this game. It really is just Risk on a Middle-earth map. However, there are two key differences. One, there's a track that you can barely see on this map, and this is to do with the ring going to Mordor. I guess I don't know. I said I don't know Lord of the Rings. But it's basically a timer on the game. Now, there are certain parts on this track where you've got to roll the dice to decide how long it goes on for. So it's not a fixed number of rounds, but within a certain realm of possibility, it's going to be whatever it is. I don't know, 20, whatever the number is of rounds. And theoretically, it could go on forever because you could keep rolling the number that means it doesn't move on. But that means that the game will end within a reasonable finite amount of time, generally speaking. I think it took us about 4 hours with 3 players, and most of us hadn't played it before. So there's that, right? And so you're going to score at the end of the game based on how many regions you control. So the second thing that makes it cool is there's these action event type cards. I don't even remember how you get them, but I think you've got to move your leader character to certain spots on the board or whatever. There's a little bit of an incentive to try and do things on the board. And it's all tied in with the book and whatever, but basically you're not necessarily just trying to hold a particular region like you would be in Risk. Sometimes you want to venture out and grab hold of certain areas because it's going to give you some benefit. And if you want to get into the theme, it's quite thematic. If you want to play it like me, like a Euro gamer, it's like, well, if I get there, I'm going to get a card. And a lot of these cards have some kind of thing that you can trigger. Choose one bridge to block until the start of your next turn. No battalions may cross. Right, nice little strategic option. You set yourself up for that. But it's also worth a point. Gates of Mora receive extra battalions on Aragon, 4 battalions or 2 battalions. You're going to get points based on certain things, how many battalions you're able to deploy or whatever. So cool. So breaks up the monotony, and Risk can be monotonous, with some extra events that are interesting, gives you another way to score points. We had some really interesting moments where someone was like, bang, oh, I can do that. Get in the back door and whatever. Or this one here where you can't attack me through that way for this turn. I've got one turn to recover my setup. Our scores with the three of us were really quite close, like within a point. Scores were in the low 30s, I think. We were within a point of each other. About half my points were from doing these cards because I'm the Eurogamer. So I'm like, oh, well, I can do this. I can achieve that. I can get a point. I can go do this. I can achieve that. I can get a point. Meanwhile, you're still trying to hold on to territory and get as many armies as you can. And sometimes those last couple of battles where it's like, well, if I can hold on to this region, that's going to be so many extra points at the end. And then everybody else knows that. But I don't have any great desire to spend another 4 hours of my life doing this. But I did enjoy it one time. I'm sure I'll end up playing it again. I give this one a 6. I give base Risk a 5. It's just too long still and not interesting enough to justify it being any higher than a 6. So yeah, that's Risk, a game that I was surprised had come up so many times in my life. It's just too long to play it in real life with real people. And I don't know how you would design around that other than what they've done with Lord of the Rings Risk. But it's classic and clean and there's nothing mechanically wrong with it. It just turns out that there's a lot better games out there. But if you want a classic area control game that's easy to learn and teach and you're quite happy to spend a whole afternoon playing it, this is fantastic. It's available nearly anywhere, everywhere. It's a mass market game and you probably know someone who has a copy sitting up in their shelf somewhere, maybe even a non-gamer. Try the emulator. Buy Lux Delux. Definitely worth the money. But for me, it's 5 out of 10. Thanks for watching. I was going to tell my story about with Philip. He was a couple of years older than me, and my mother thought he was a bad influence. Anyway, we moved to different parts of the country, and then a few years later, we were driving through that area or whatever. I think it was just me and my mother, and he gave me a Supertramp tape and an Alistair MacLean novel, and I learnt to play the logical song which is Supertramp, and I read a whole bunch of Alistair MacLean novels after that. So, a guy who had an interesting influence on my life, actually. Someone who my mother wasn't always particularly happy that I was hanging around with because he used to get us into all kinds of trouble. Interesting guy. Turned out to be a really nice guy, actually, when he grew up a little bit. That is going to do it, and we will make a video out of that somehow.